Just before we invite the members of the panel to join for the discussion, I'd like to thank two people who are also here with us today, our friends Jörg from the Goethe Institute and Guillaume from the Institut Français, who have accompanied us throughout. They're very, very enthusiastic, and thanks to their collaboration, we have organized 3 CFR Symposia over the last 3 years. The next one will take place on May 4th this year, to which you're all, of course, invited. But this is yet another example of the wonderful offshoots, we can say, that this project has had. And now I'd like to invite, please, Professor Ofra Imbar, Professor Batia Laufer, and Dr. Tziona Levy to discuss the very hot subject.
Okay, I'm going to talk about lexical knowledge. Now, of course, lexical knowledge is not the only knowledge in a language, but lex is a very good predictor of general language proficiency, and it's the best predictor of reading comprehension. So what I'm going to show you is some hard data of what people know, what they should know, what the gaps are, and the question will be whether they can be bridged and what should be done in order to bridge them. Okay, now I'll show you first 2 quotations from the Evaluation Committee of Malag, and this was the Evaluation Committee of Business Administration. I took 2 ominous quotes. As we learned in a conversation with students and teaching staff, students rarely read English and rely mostly on readily available unofficial summaries. That's MBA. MBA, not BA. Serious efforts should be undertaken to improve the reading habits of students. English fluency, as well as written, oral, and electronic communication skills should be required of all students. Now, that was about 4 years ago, before the ECOSTAR project started. They were already talking about other skills, not just reading. Now, so how is it that we have the present situation as expressed in 1, and can the goals as they are expressed in 2, can these goals be reached? Let's see what happens. What is the entry level of our university students? As you know, at the national level, there are no minimal entry requirements. Psychometric test is a placement test. It's not an admission test. You can get into a college even if your English level is 0. Of course, individual institutions can set their own requirements, but nationally, there are no requirements. Of course, luckily, there is a requirement. There is an exit level requirement that is 134 on AMIR, or completion of advanced course. Now, let's see. What do our students know in terms of lexis? We'll get there later on, but what is the profile of our students when they get into colleges and universities? Of course, you know that the range of the psychometric English part is from 50 to 150. This is the distribution of scores, right? We all know that. Can you guess how many students, what percentage of students get exemption in this country? Yes? 2 figures, 1, AMIR 1, AMIRAM. Advanced 2 is about 1/4. Advanced 1 is 1/4. Basic and pre-basic, you can see that about 35% of students are below the average. The average Israeli student is advanced 1. Now, this is rather depressing, but I think my whole talk is going to be depressing. Now, how are we supposed to figure out what to do with this? According to the Council for Higher Education resolution in 2013, we've divided them all into levels and hours of instruction. So we know that we have 4 hours for advanced 2, 6, etc., 8 and 6. In other words, you can see from my bottom line is if you take a student at 0 knowledge, you have to bring him to independent reading, at least independent academic reading, in 20 to 22 semester hours. 4 semester hours from 0 knowledge to independent reading. That's what we were supposed to do. And how are we supposed to do this? We had a very good intention. So we had to have a professional committee in 14 that will examine materials and tests, set the goals for each level, provide guidelines, and then report back to chair. Now, we should have had all these guidelines by 2016, but as many people know, no such committee has ever been established for non-academic reasons. No more said about this. Okay. So you are the ones who have to cope with academic challenges. Now, what are these academic challenges? I'm going to talk first only about reading comprehension. Now, to read independently academic prose, we have to know receptively 7,000 to 8,000 word families. That's research-based. Just in case you don't know how much it is, by comparison with native speakers, it's not too much. But by comparison with what our students know, it's very much. So now I'm going to show you the most depressing slide, is what our students know. That is, what kind of gap you have to bridge. Now, that is the depressing slide. At the end of high school, the 5-pointers know about 3,500 lexical families. 5-pointers. 4-pointers, 2,000. Now, keep in mind that goal figures, about 7,000, okay? 7,000 is the goal. That's what happens at the end of high school. Now, all these kids go into colleges and universities and look now at what the lexical size is at different levels. By the way, this was a huge project based on a PhD by Heke Kalowski. Is she here? I don't know. Oh yes, she is here. And about over 700 people were tested at different level, and they all took vocabulary size tests. So people who are exempt know from 6,000 to 8,000 level, which means, by the way, that Amir test is doing a good job. It really identifies people who can read independently. Advanced 2 people know around 5,000 words. That is the gap. In the red you have the gaps, 1,000. Advanced 1, the gap is already from 2,000 to 3,000. Basic, 4,000. Pre-basic, more than 5,000. These are the gaps. Now, you remember on the right, you can see how many teaching hours you have at your disposal to close the gap. Can we do it? Can we bridge the gap between 3,000 and 6,000 in 2 semesters, between 2,000 and 6,000 in 3 semesters, 1 and 6 in 4 semesters? Now, it is very important to answer this question, because if you cannot do this, if you cannot teach 1,000 to 2,000 word families in 1 semester, what will happen is that the gap between what they know and what they should know will grow at each subsequent level. I don't know whether you can figure it out, but I can show you a table. Let's suppose that you look at basic, 2,000, and let's suppose that they can learn in 1 semester only 500. What will happen? When they get to advanced 2, instead of knowing 3,000, they would know 5,2, right? Then they go to the next level. They cannot learn 2,000. They already have the gap 2,500. And they can learn 500. Then at advanced 2, they will be at 3,000. 3,000, more or less. Can you get the idea? So, okay, good. And if that bridge if that gap cannot be bridged, then each class will actually have 2 populations. One at the desired level, which was classified by Amir, and then the other people who came from lower levels and are combined, broadening their gap, okay? And you know what happens with such mixed classes. What do? Either you lower the entire level, or you just let these people pass because your administration wants them to pass and get the degree, okay? So the lower the level, the harder it is to close the gap. Can the lexical gap be bridged? You see, I am a person who believes data. So to see that, do we have longitudinal studies that try and test thousands of words? The answer is no, except one first study, again by Heke. It was part of her PhD, a longitudinal study that lasted 3 semesters and investigates large quantities of words. We had 9 target words, new words, and we measured overall vocabulary size in 3 different conditions. One, teaching reading and reading strategies. Unfortunately, I'm telling what I think, this is still the most favorite method of teaching for many teachers. Another method was reading plus vocabulary self-study. Students were assigned quantities of vocabulary and were periodically tested. And the third condition was reading plus vocabulary instruction plus self-study plus testing. I guess that is not too encouraging, but at least these are data. 3 semesters. Now, these were people who were quite bad. You can see that on pre-test, they all knew less than 2,000 words. They were non-readers. After 3 semesters, look at the right column, how much they learn. So the good news is that if you teach vocabulary, if you ask them to study for testing, it helps much more than reading only. Look at reading plus strategies. 3 semesters, they learned 400 words. But remember what I said, the gaps that have to be bridged require students to learn at least 1,000-word families per semester. These are results after 3 semesters. 3 semesters. So what do they mean? If these results reflect the situation, and since as an empirical researcher I always say, well, if this was the first study, you need more studies of that, but as you can understand, such studies are very difficult to carry out. They're longitudinal, you have to design it very carefully. So if this is what happens, then students at low levels are bound to fail, or, of course, they will graduate, but with inadequate knowledge, totally inadequate knowledge. If you think that I was depressing, don't forget that so far I was talking about receptive knowledge only. But we've just heard that we need productive knowledge as well. And what do we know about productive vocabulary? We know that it is more difficult to develop that receptive because there is more to know about each word. When you read a text, collocations are there for you. When you produce language, you need to provide the correct collocations, for example. Besides, it's also a matter of retrieval, fast retrieval, memory. It's much harder to achieve a good, productive vocabulary. How much do our learners know actively? Are you prepared for a shock? Again, the data, here it is. I tested them 10 years ago, I think. Oh gosh, it's almost 20. In the 10th grade, they knew 1,700 actively, but several years ago, one of my PhD graduates, Tamia Viad and myself, we tested 12th graders. They know about 2,300 word families actively. Now, I just gave you Danish data that has just come out. By the way, you can see hours of instruction. In Danish schools, they learned almost twice as much, 12, no, not twice as much, no. They learned slightly more, but in half the number, but the number of hours of instruction is almost half. By the way, receptive vocabulary of these Danish kids is 4,600 at the end of high school, and they are unhappy, the Danes. And it was tested by elicitation test, the productive vocabulary. So, do we know what productive vocabulary goals are in research? The only thing we know is that to conduct a very simple conversation, you need to know about 2,000 word families to conduct a simple conversation, but that's not giving a presentation on psychology, and this is not writing a report. We do not have research on how many vocabularies are needed on that. So, let me sum up. So proficiency levels in terms of vocabulary knowledge are what we know is only exempted students have the appropriate lexical knowledge. Other levels have to learn from 1K to 6K to be able to read. We do not have longitudinal studies on acquisitions of thousands of words. We have no quantitative studies on productive lexis, but we know that productive knowledge is much more difficult to achieve. Then there are no, what I've just tried to see that there are very serious gaps between the lexis learners need and the lexis they have. It is not the European situation, because in Europe, people who get to higher education are at least at B1, if not B2 level. So the Europeans do not have to cope with the equivalent of our basic and pre-basic students. In other words, Europe is where we were before colleges were established. We had only Mitkadmim Aleph, Mitkadmim Bet. That's Europe. That's European situations. Our situation is much more, say, challenging. Can these gaps be bridged? If you ask me, my gut feeling, when I say gut feeling, it's usually based on experience in my previous life as a language EFL teacher, in my present life as an academic researcher of SLA. I think that Advanced 2 can definitely bridge the gap. It can go even further and do the other skills. Advanced 1, with a lot of effort. I am very, very pessimistic about the lower levels in the present framework. By the way, the Malag framework is geared towards reading comprehension. Whenever I say we because I was actually the initiator of this reform, whenever we talked about, and Ofra was there too, whenever we talked about setting goals, we talked about academic reading only. We did not talk about the other skills. So people were talking here about the evaluation committee. Whenever you talk about your mission and your goals and your development, you have to talk about adding the other skills, because the present Malag framework, which is, by the way, very hard to implement even now, I mean, I'm still bleeding. It is geared only towards reading comprehension, and even there are serious lexical gaps. Now, can these gaps be bridged? I believe that with sufficient number of teaching hours. You cannot do it with taking 0 and giving them for semester 20 or 22 hours, impossible. Adequate teaching materials, frontal and self-study, whatever you're doing now in ECOSTAR. I am a believer in testing. And I think that at individual institutions, you can do whatever you will persuade your administration to do, and at least one good slide I'll have at least. Teaching is the greatest act of optimism.